Today we're going to be discussing how to base Stonehaven miniatures. We're going to be looking at the Half Dragon Duelist. We've got a couple of tools here. In an ideal world, your tools would be needle nose pliers and some craft clippers. But in a pinch, you can make do with pretty much just a pair of scissors. So with this one, the base is a little bit smaller. The base tab is a little bit smaller than the base slot. For me as a hobbyist, that's really so you can put it on a more scenic base, and we'll be doing that with one of these as well. So for our first miniature, you want to clean up the edges of things, clip off any extra sprue material that you have, and then what you want to do is use an X-Acto knife to clean around the miniature and clean off any mold lines that might be there. And with pewter miniatures, the mold lines are usually fairly minimal, but it's still nice to go over them and clean them up a little bit so they're not as pronounced when it's painted. The next part of basing the miniature is attaching the miniature to the base. Now if you were to just glue this right on, it would probably stay on as long as you balanced it just right when you did that. But what I like to do is to bend the base tab into a shallow U shape. Now if you only had scissors, you can use the end of your scissors to do that. Just take your scissors and grasp a little piece of the end of the base and just bend it to the side so that it makes a really shallow U or V shape. And you can do that with both sides. If all you have is a pair of scissors and some glue, you can base these miniatures. And in fact, if you don't have glue, just bending it into that shape like that right there is actually going to be enough to hold it in the base. So then once you have it bent like that, you just kind of insert it into the base, and that's fine. And sometimes I'll do that, like if I'm just playing with the miniature really quick in a game, I'll just bend it in there, and that's usually enough to hold it on pretty much indefinitely. And I learned this trick from my first DM, my first game of Dungeons & Dragons many years ago, and so that's the trick. You bend it into the U, you put it in, and it creates friction on both sides. Now if you want that to be even more permanent, take a little bit of super glue and just kind of let it soak down into the parts that are touching. You don't need to put glue all over, just glue and just let it kind of soak down through its own natural process. Always put a piece of paper under what you're working on with super glue or you'll ruin your table. So while that's drying, we're going to do a base that's a more scenic base. So I've got this piece of cork that I've cut to look kind of like a rock, just by breaking chunks off the side. And that's what I like to do when I have a cool hero that I'm going to put into a game or something. I'll put it on a more scenic base, which is really why the base tabs are smaller than the base slots, is because it makes it easier to do a scenic base. There's less cutting. So I'm going to glue my rock on there with super glue, or it's cork, but I'm pretending like it's rock because cork does a great job once painted of looking like a miniature rock. And then I'm going to cut out a slot of cork, and that's going to be where my base tab goes. And I'm going to want that to be a little bit deeper. So, and then because the base tab is small, it fits the slot perfectly. You can see that from end to end. Won't need to do any filling. And then can apply the glue there so that it's, I think I'll have it facing this way so it'll be dramatically posed on top of this rock. I'm going to lay that on its side because the cork is a little bendier than I want it to be for just letting it stand up, but it should be fine on its side. Alright, now that this one's a little more done, I'm going to cover these spots on the base. That's what I like to do, with some paper. Now you can use any kind of paper, but black construction paper is nice because it's going to blend a little bit better in case any of my sand texture that I'm going to add later comes up. So what I do there is I put glue, super glue, over the area that needs to be where the paper needs to go. And I'll kind of tease that into place with my dull X-Acto knife. It's more dangerous than a sharp X-Acto knife, you know. So that's covering the excess spots, and it's making it smooth so that when I apply some sand to the top of it, which I'm about to show you how to do, I don't run into any excessive bumpiness. Again, I'm just putting it carefully into place with my X-Acto knife, and I'm going to let this one dry before I slice that off, before I slice the extra part off. Okay, so what we're going to be doing next is making a base like this one has here. So this one has a base that has been textured with sand. Now this sand is not special sand, it's just sand that I found behind my house in my kind of shed area. Basically any like fine grained sand you can find. Usually you can find it kind of on the edges of things, sort of beside a sidewalk or in a shed. Just nice fine dry sand or dirt that doesn't have too big of particles. And so I dug some out of my shed. That's the stuff I usually use. Alright, I think that's probably dry enough. Super glue, I mean, you could let it dry longer, but it should start to kind of stick in place if you haven't used too much within a few minutes. I'm going to wipe off the excess because I don't want it to interfere too much with glue that I'm about to add. So then, once I've got my pieces of black construction paper covering the parts that were left open, glue, and basically one of my worst paintbrushes. You don't want to use a nice paintbrush for this because you're going to end up with glue and sand in it. And then what I like to do is, even if I'm planning on putting grass or something on other parts of the base, I paint the whole thing with glue because it's almost easier to do that way. You don't have to worry about matching the grass exactly to the places that don't have glue. And the glue tends to form a full layer that holds on better than tiny spots of glue. So I try to get as close to the feet as possible without getting right on the feet. And then I'll kind of clean off my brush a little bit because I'll have to use the brush to clean off any of the dirt specks that get onto the other parts. So I've got my pile of dirt, and I'm just going to take the glued part, rub it around in there, shake off the rest, and then I like to take my thumb and wipe around the edge so that there's no dirt stuck to the edge. Inspect it to make sure there's no dirt, like big chunks that are stuck right against the feet, because that'll make it harder to paint the toes. Okay, and there's our miniature. It's all based, glued. It's got a nice sand texture that will show up really well when I paint it. And here is my hero version And it looks like there's a little bit of base tab sticking out there, so I can just clip that even. And when that paints up, you won't even be able to tell that there's a base tab there. And it'll look really cool because they're standing up on this kind of rocky outcropping like a real hero. And I may put some grass down there afterwards because, you know, I like gluing grass to things. Anyway, so that's our tutorial on basing the half dragon, or basically any of our miniatures, and kind of the reasoning behind the base size. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Another nice part about having the base tab small is if I wanted to put a cool scenic thing on the base, like a treasure chest or a, you know, book or something, I could put that on the back of the base and move the miniature closer to the front. Just gives you a little more options having a smaller base tab. For those of us who want to really customize the minis and have them exactly the way we want them to be on a cool custom base. So thanks so much for watching, and happy painting and assembling.